Hello and welcome. In today's episode, we delve into one of the most critical global conflicts of our time, the Russia-Ukraine war, global implications, lessons for Nigeria, and the Nigerian Army. This war has reshaped geopolitics, disrupted economies, and provided key lessons in modern warfare that are relevant to our national security efforts in Nigeria. As Nigeria navigates security challenges such as insurgency and terrorism, understanding the military strategies, defense tactics, and diplomatic responses in the Russia-Ukraine conflict is crucial for refining our approach. If you find value in discussions like these, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. Share this podcast or video with others, and let's build a community of informed citizens working towards a stronger Nigeria. Let's dive right in.
It's October 2024, and man, it seems like everywhere you look, the Russia-Ukraine war is still dominating the headlines. It's easy to feel kind of numb to it all, especially for folks like me who are, a world away from Eastern Europe. But here's the thing. This conflict, it's got its tendrils everywhere. It's impacting all of us, even if we don't always see it. So today, we're doing a deep dive, really digging into an insightful analysis titled, get this, The Russia-Ukraine War, Global Implications, Lessons for Nigeria and the Nigerian Army. Now, before you think, whoa, military jargon, not for me, hold on. You don't need a degree in international relations to get this. We're going to break it down, plain and simple, and see why this conflict matters on a global scale.
Yeah, even for countries that seem, at least on the surface, totally removed from the whole thing.
You hit the nail on the head. It's become a global event, a geopolitical earthquake, really.
Right.
It's not just about these two countries anymore. It's like reshaping the whole world order, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like this whole conflict is throwing us back to the future. Seriously, it reminds me of all those Cold War documentaries I binged back in college, alliances changing overnight, countries forced to pick a side.
What's the most striking example of how you see this playing out?
I think it's the global polarization, definitely. It's like every country is being pushed, almost forced, to form these blocs, these alliances. You're either with Ukraine and the West, you're trying to walk this tightrope of neutrality, or, and this is a big one, you're quietly siding with Russia. And this pressure cooker, it's reshaping everything. Alliances, trade, military strategies. It's happening in ways we haven't seen in, decades? It's like someone hit fast forward on global power dynamics and no one knows how to hit pause. Major Cold War 2.0 vibes, and I gotta say, I'm kind of here for it. But speaking of navigating these tricky geopolitical waters, the analysis we're looking at focuses on a very specific country, Nigeria. Now, they're a major player in Africa, dealing with their own security issues, big time, and a key member of the African Union. So how does this war in Eastern Europe make their situation even more, complicated?
Nigeria's position. It's fascinating, really, but also kind of precarious. See, they've got these strong ties to both sides. The West and Russia, talk about a balancing act. Economically, they trade with both. Militarily, they've gotten equipment and training from both. So this conflict, it puts them in a real bind, forcing them to really weigh their options. Like, who gets their diplomatic support, especially at the UN? Who do they buy weapons from? Resources. It's a big deal because the decisions Nigeria makes here, they can have huge consequences, not just for them, for the entire African continent.
And it's not just about, picking a side in this whole geopolitical showdown, is it? This war. It's hitting everyone where it hurts the wallet. I swear, every time I fill up my gas tank, I'm like, man, this war is real.
Oh, tell me about it. And that's where these ripple effects, they become impossible to ignore. The source, it really emphasizes Russia's role as this energy powerhouse, right? And then there's Ukraine. They're essential to global food markets. It's like they're both these key players in the world's supply chains, and now everything's a mess.
It's crazy, right? We're talking about a conflict thousands of miles away, impacting what I see on the shelves in my local grocery store. It's wild. It's like that butterfly effect thing, but on a global scale.
Yeah.
The source keeps mentioning this domino effect. What does that even mean in this context?
So picture this. The war kicks off, and then boom, sanctions on Russia. It's like this 1-2 punch that sends shockwaves through the entire global system. Imagine like a giant rock being chucked into a pond, those ripples. They just keep going and going. Suddenly, oil and gas prices, they go through the roof.
Ugh, don't remind me. Those gas prices last year were brutal.
Exactly. And it's not just gas. Ukraine. They're a major exporter of wheat, sunflower oil, all these crucial ingredients for a ton of food products we rely on. So when their production and exports get disrupted, guess what happens? Shortages, price hikes. worldwide.
Okay, so we're talking inflation, supply chain chaos.
Hmm.
Man, it's kind of scary how deep this rabbit hole goes. But switching gears for a sec, back to Nigeria. They're a big-time oil producer themselves, right? Wouldn't that, like, shield them from some of this economic doom and gloom?
That's a great point. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but the source actually says it cuts both ways. On the one hand, yeah, higher oil prices could mean more money for Nigeria in the short term, which, hey, sounds good on paper, but it also makes them even more reliant on a global market that is, let's face it, not exactly known for its stability. What happens if demand drops or those prices suddenly tank? The analysis really hammers home the importance of economic diversification, especially for countries like Nigeria in this climate.
So instead of putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak, it's about building a more, I don't know, a more resilient and diverse economy.
Exactly. Diversification is key. And we can't forget about food security either. Even as an oil producer, Nigeria still gets hit by those rising global food prices. And who ends up bearing the brunt of that? Everyday people. The analysis really drives home that this isn't just some abstract economic issue, it's a human issue.
It's like everything's connected. Geopolitics, economics, food security. It's kind of overwhelming when you really think about it. And speaking of connections, this war, it's not just playing out on battlefields and like economic forecasts. There's a whole other side to this thing we got to unpack. It's like this war, it's almost rewriting the rule book on how wars are fought, you know?
Yeah, no doubt. And the analysis we're going through, it really digs into that. It highlights how this conflict, it's different. Drones, cyber warfare, information operations. It's like something out of a sci-fi movie, honestly.
It's giving, like, Tom Clancy meets Black Mirror vibes, and I can't tell if I should be totally riveted or completely terrified. But seriously, how is all this tech changing things on the ground?
It's not just changing things, it's the thing now. Technology, it's not an optional extra in warfare anymore. It's central. Like, take drones, right? The analysis talks about how Ukraine's been using them, and it's been incredibly effective, even against a military powerhouse like Russia. And we're not even just talking about those high-tech military drones.
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah, even the ones you can buy online, commercially available drones, those have become game changers, too.
Hold on. So those things I can buy online for, like, taking aerial shots of my house, those are being used in a real-life war.
Yep. It's a perfect example of how technology is sort of leveling the playing field. Ukraine's been using them for everything. Reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, targeting, even carrying out strikes.
Yeah.
It's huge, especially when you're up against a much bigger, more old-school military.
It's like David versus Goliath, but instead of a slingshot, it's a drone. That's kind of wild. The source specifically talks about the lessons here for Nigeria, especially in their fight against Boko Haram. So how does this whole high-tech warfare thing, how does that play out in that context?
Well, think about the kind of enemy Boko Haram is. They're not a traditional army, right? It's all asymmetric tactics, hit-and-run attacks, blending in with civilians, operating in these really remote, hard-to-reach areas.
So how do you fight an enemy that's like constantly on the move, super elusive? It's like trying to hit a moving target in the dark.
Exactly. And that's where technology, especially drones, could be a real game changer for Nigeria. Imagine real-time surveillance over those remote regions where Boko Haram operates, gathering intel, maybe even carrying out those super precise strikes, to try to minimize civilian casualties.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense strategically. But it also feels, I don't know, kind of like a slippery slope. Where do you draw the line?
You've hit on something really important there. The source, it doesn't shy away from the ethical questions. Like, there's always that risk of unintended consequences with this stuff. Civilian casualties, things escalating further than anyone intended, even the technology falling into the wrong hands.
It's like every solution seems to come with a whole new set of challenges,
Yeah.
But in all this talk about drones and cyber warfare, the source makes it clear that it's not just about having the latest gadgets, right?
100%. The human element, that's still crucial. The analysis actually talks about how surprisingly effective Ukraine's territorial defense forces have been. Ordinary citizens, just regular folks, taking up arms to defend their homes. That kind of resilience, that determination against a much stronger adversary, it's pretty powerful. It shows what happens when a whole population is united and willing to resist.
I mean, that's incredible. It just reminds you that courage and resilience, those things aren't limited to soldiers in uniform. But can you really, like, replicate that kind of grassroots resistance? Can it work in a different context, like in Nigeria with Boko Haram?
It's a good question, and the analysis does touch on that. It suggests that for Nigeria, creating these local defense units, properly trained, of course, and integrated with the military, that could be a really effective way to provide a more, localized, agile response to security threats.
So instead of relying on a centralized force that might be spread thin, it's about empowering communities to be part of the solution.
Exactly. Imagine if you have communities that are able to defend themselves, working alongside the army, rather than just waiting for help to arrive.
It's like that old saying, it takes a village. Though in this case, it's also about international support, right? The source mentions all the help that Ukraine is getting from its allies, weapons, financial aid, intelligence sharing. It seems like even now, having powerful friends really does matter.
For sure. I mean, Ukraine's allies have been absolutely critical in their ability to hold off the invasion. It all goes back to that global chess game we were talking about earlier. No nation is truly on its own, especially when you're dealing with a larger adversary. Alliances matter.
So what's the takeaway for a country like Nigeria then, especially given their unique position on the world stage?
The source suggests that for Nigeria, it's all about building those strong alliances, but with countries that share their interests and can provide the right kind of support. We're talking counterterrorism expertise, sharing intelligence, maybe joint training exercises. It's about building a network because in our world today, threats can pop up from anywhere.
Be prepared, right? It's about building those relationships before you actually need them, because who knows what tomorrow will bring. Speaking of which, there's one last piece of this puzzle we got to talk about before we wrap things up. Cybersecurity and this whole thing about information warfare. It sounds like something straight out of a spy movie.
Well, in the 21st century, the battleground isn't just physical anymore, right? It's digital too. The source points out how Russia has used cyber attacks against Ukraine, trying to, sow chaos, disrupt their infrastructure, basically mess with their ability to function.
So it's like a whole other dimension of war happening in the shadows, but with real-world consequences.
Exactly. And on the flip side, Ukraine has been very successful using things like social media to rally international support, to really control the narrative of what's happening.
It's like this whole other battle for hearts and minds, and it's playing out on a global scale.
Yeah.
How do you even begin to fight back against that?
Well, that's where investing in serious, robust cybersecurity becomes absolutely essential. The source makes it clear that Nigeria is just as vulnerable to these kinds of attacks as anyone else, especially from groups like Boko Haram, who are already using disinformation and propaganda really effectively. It's about protecting your own digital borders, but also being able to push back against those disinformation campaigns, to make sure people have access to accurate information.
Wow. So it's like we've got this whole other war front, but instead of guns, it's all about keyboards and code. Well, on that note, I think it's time to start wrapping things up. So, as we come to the end of our deep dive here, what's the big takeaway? What's that aha moment we should all be walking away with?
For me, it's that realization that even conflicts that seem really far away, like what's happening in Ukraine, they can have these huge ripple effects across the globe. It's a reminder that we're not just living in the same world, we're all interconnected, and understanding these complex issues from geopolitics and economics to technology and the changing face of war, it's more important than ever.
You got that right. It's been eye-opening, to say the least. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time.
Thank you for staying with us through this insightful discussion on the Russia-Ukraine war, global implications, lessons for Nigeria, and the Nigerian Army. If you found this episode valuable, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you'll always know when we release new content. Let's keep this conversation going. Share this video with your friends, family, and colleagues to help spread awareness. We'd love to hear from you. Use the comment section to share your thoughts on today's topic and suggest the next issue or book you'd like us to cover in future episodes. See you next time.